3 weeks passed and I stopped checking my arm in the mornings. That was the deal I made with myself. Wake up, pull on a long-sleeve shirt without looking, drink coffee, drive to work. Like nothing was different. It held for about 3 days. Then I noticed the sleeves had gotten tight around the forearm. The patches had crept from my wrist toward my elbow. 2, maybe 3 inches of that white crystalline growth moving slow and patient up the inside of my arm. It looked like frost on a window pane, except it pulsed. A low, steady beat, like a second heartbeat slightly out of sync with my own. No pain at all. That was what kept getting to me. Nothing that wrong should feel like nothing. Deliveries had gone nightly by then. Not Monday and Thursday, every single night at 3 a.m., 5 knocks, same patients. I stopped thinking of it as anything and just made the order. Mr. Trosclair left extra cash in the register drawer without explaining. I didn't ask. We were past that stage. Marguerite had stopped coming inside. Her car was always parked on the gravel shoulder when I arrived, headlights off, just her silhouette staring toward the tree line. Some nights she'd wave when I knocked on her window. When she did, the parking lot light caught her hand wrong. Too smooth. Too pale. Like she was wearing a glove she wasn't wearing. I asked about it once. She said the antifungals weren't working. A lab in New Orleans had called her samples unclassifiable. She told me this in a flat voice. Her hands shook when she held the coffee I'd brought. "You sleeping okay?" she asked. I said yes. I wasn't. The dreams started the 3rd night after the Fryer incident. Always the same attic, low ceiling, water stains on plywood walls, heat like an oven. Black water stretching to the horizon outside the window. I'd crouch near the glass and watch the flood rise through the floor slats, cold and salt-smelling and sweet underneath, the way fruit smells when it's been submerged too long. Below me, 5 knocks. Pause. 5 more. "Let us in. We just want to come home." I always called back, even knowing I shouldn't. That's the thing about dreams. The part of you that knows better is just a passenger. I started setting an alarm to wake at 4 hours. 4 hours felt safe. The water was still at chest level then. Each morning it had been a little higher than the night before. 9 days before the settlement confrontation, I saw Noah. I was coming back from a supply run to the Walmart in Houma, pulling to a stop sign outside Bayou Vista Elementary just as school was starting. Kids in the crosswalk, crossing guard, waving them through. I was half awake when one of them turned and looked at my truck. Small boy, dark eyes, brown hair needing a cut, blue backpack with a cartoon dinosaur. He'd been laughing at something. The laugh stopped when his eyes met mine and his head tilted. Then he smiled. The corners went too wide. I looked at his shadow on the pavement. Morning sun was low and harsh. The shadow matched his body except the head. The shadow's head had something growing from the top of it, curved and branching. Antlers, clear as anything. His actual head had no antlers, just brown hair. Shadow, antlers, real head, nothing. I blinked and looked back and forth twice. Noah raised one hand and waved at me slowly. From the truck I could see his teeth when he smiled. Narrow, pointed, like the jaw of a catfish. I drove without waiting for the crossing guard. My hands shook the whole way back. I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes staring at the steering wheel, counting the light poles. 4. Always 4. I needed something to stay the same. Patricia Landry called that afternoon. She was the legal aid lawyer helping me with my student loan deferment. The original reason I'd needed this job, back when that seemed like the worst problem I had. She sounded careful on the phone. "I got sidetracked on something," she said. "The Tobito family. I pulled property and death records. Ethan, they're all dead. Officially. Death certificates, coroner's reports, 2005. Drowning, all 32. Bodies recovered 3 weeks after the storm." She paused. "Buried at St. Joseph's Cemetery in Chauvin. I have plot numbers if you want them." I wrote them on the back of a Wendy's receipt. I drove to Chauvin before my shift. St. Joseph's was a small parish cemetery, live oaks dragging Spanish moss low over the gate. I found the section near the back fence and walked the row. The headstones had photographs behind glass ovals at the top. Jules Thibodeau. August 29th, 2005. Age 54. Thérèse Thibodeau. August 29th, 2005. Age 51. Marie Thibodeau. August 29th, 2005. Age 8. Noah Verrett. August 29th, 2005. Age 6. Noah's photograph. Small boy. Gap-toothed smile. Brown hair needing a cut. Blue shirt. Squinting in the sun. He looked exactly like the kid at the crosswalk. Down to the gap in his teeth. Dead 20 years. I put my hand flat on the stone. Solid granite. Warm from the evening sun. I stood there until the mosquitoes got bad and the light was gone, reading every name, knowing every one of them from the freezer and the settlement and the texts on my phone. They'd all been here the whole time. The thing wearing their faces had been at it for 20 years. Had gotten good enough at it that Marguerite, who had known these people personally, had believed it, had touched it, had started growing patches on her palm. I drove back without the radio on. I didn't go in for my shift. I called Mr. Trosclair and he answered on the first ring. Before I could say anything, he said, "Don't do something stupid, Ethan." Quiet and flat, like he'd been expecting this call for weeks. I hung up and drove south. I turned onto the gravel road just before midnight. The cypress trees closed in the same way they always had. The difference was I understood what the feeling meant now. Not discovery. More like walking into something's throat with your eyes open. The settlement looked the same. 12 shacks on stilts, clothes on lines swaying in no wind, light in the windows, smoke from a chimney in July heat. The saltwater smell hit me 50 yards out, sharp and deep, with that sweet dark rot underneath. I got out and started yelling, "I know your names. Every one of you, Jules, Thérèse, Marie, Noah. I stood at your headstones tonight. 32 graves in Chauvin, 32 bodies recovered from this exact swamp. Whatever you are not those people." 4 seconds of silence. Then the doors opened. They came out one at a time, then in groups. Jules and Thérèse, the children in clean clothes, more rising from the water beneath the walkways, black water sheeting off their coats, more from the tree line. I counted to 30 and stopped counting. Their skin had gone completely crystalline. Not spots anymore, all of it. That white rippling surface, something pressing from inside in a slow, steady rhythm. Jules's face had stopped holding its shape. The skin hung loose at his jaw, the edges beginning to separate, like a mask worn too many times. He walked toward me and stopped at 6 feet. His eyes were pure black, reflecting nothing. "You found our graves," he said, Jules's voice thick with that wet gurgle underneath. "Then you know we died in that water. We died in our attics waiting for boats that came 4 days late, and the water kept us and changed us." His black eyes moved to my arm, "The way it's changing you." My sleeve had ridden up. The patches on my forearm pulsed harder than I'd ever felt, hard and fast and excited, like something that recognized where it was and wanted to get closer. Jules extended his gray crystalline hand, palm up. "Join us. The hunger goes quiet after the first year. It becomes background, like traffic, like frogs calling, anything you stop hearing eventually. You'll have everyone here, every name on every stone." The loose skin at his jaw shifted when he spoke. "You've been dreaming the attic for weeks. You already know what the water feels like. You're most of the way home." I thought about Marguerite in her car with her white hands. I thought about Noah's antler shadow. I thought about Mr. Trosclair, who had known all of this for 20 years and handed me a laminated card and sent me in anyway. I reached into my pocket and took out my pocket knife. Jules watched me open it. Nothing changed in his expression. "I'd rather bleed out in this swamp," I said, "than let you finish what you started on my arm." I pressed the blade to my wrist, above the highest patch, and pushed until the sting came. The blood that ran out was black. Not dark red. Black. Thick and wrong, like bayou water at midnight, dripping off my fingers into the mud. Jules laughed. That wet gurgle pushed all the way up through Jules's voice. The water is in your blood already, in your lungs, in your dreams. You can't cut it out. He stepped forward once. The figures behind him moved too, slow and forward-leaning, tightening in from three sides. The smell filled my chest. My patches hammered. Then the sky changed. One pale line at the eastern horizon, gray-pink spreading up through the cypress canopy. Then one actual ray of early sun cut across the black water between the shacks. The sound that went through the settlement was high and wet and furious. 30-some voices, a sound I felt in my back teeth. Jules went rigid. He stepped back twice, quick. The others broke for the shacks and the water, nearly running, that forward lean becoming extreme as they rushed. Children and adults, all of them retreating fast. Jules held his ground one moment longer. His black eyes found mine. "The sun goes down again tonight," he said. "It always does." He stepped backward off the walkway. The water barely moved. I stood there with black blood slowing at my wrist, already closing, the edges sealing with thin white crystal, and the settlement was empty and quiet. Clothes on lines, smoke from a chimney, same as it had always looked, patient, waiting. I walked back to my truck. I drove until I hit the highway. I drove until I could see gas station lights and hear traffic and smell coffee from a drive-through, and the ordinary world was close enough to hold. I didn't stop shaking until somewhere outside Gonzales. I don't work at the Wendy's anymore. I moved to Baton Rouge, took what fit in my truck, left the rest. I work days at a hardware store, sawdust and machine oil and nothing alive. I wear long sleeves in August. People notice and I say skin condition, which ends conversations fast. The patches haven't spread since that morning. They haven't gone away. 3 on my wrist, a smear up the forearm, and a new one last month on the inside of my elbow. Pale, pulsing, size of a quarter. Marguerite says the rate has slowed. She doesn't say stopped. She meets me at a diner on Airline Highway every few weeks. Fluorescent lights, bad coffee, laminated menus. We compare patches the way people with the same slow disease compare symptoms. She has them on both hands now, creeping toward her wrists, and one at the corner of her left eye she covers with her hair. She's still looking for treatment, nothing yet. We don't talk about what happens when they reach our hearts. Some nights I drive south without meaning to. Muscle memory or something darker. The patches on my arm start warming when I get close enough, pulsing faster, like something noticing I'm nearby. I've driven past the mailbox 4 times since I left. Always keep going. There's a new orange reflector on the post, bright enough to hurt your eyes in the headlights. The road beyond it has never been paved. It probably never will be. If I crack the window, I can hear them. Not my name, not knocking, just breathing. Slow, wet, patient. Like the swamp itself asleep and dreaming of flood season. It doesn't sound angry. That's the worst part. It sounds like something that has been waiting so long that waiting and sleeping have become the same thing. Last time I drove past, I checked the rear view out of habit. Nothing in the road, just dark and cypress and the orange reflector shrinking in the glass. But the breathing followed me back to the city. I heard it under my window unit when I got into bed. I hear it some nights still, when it's quiet enough and I forget to keep the radio on. If you're ever on Highway 56 after midnight, wrong exit, bad GPS, it doesn't matter, and you see a gravel road on the left with an orange reflector on the mailbox, keep driving. Don't slow down. Don't roll your window down. And when you're clear of it, do not look in your rearview mirror. Because if you see someone standing in the road behind you, gray skin, long coat, wide-brimmed hat, one hand raised, count the fingers. That number is how many days you have left. And you'll know, in the part of your gut that doesn't lie, that they weren't just waiting there tonight. They've been following you for much longer than you think. The water is always rising. The hunger is always watching. and somewhere on my forearm, right now, something that is not my heartbeat is keeping time. I found the clearing just as the sky was going from dark to gray. The gravel road had been going maybe a mile and a half when the cypress trees opened up on both sides, pulling back like curtains. And there it was. 12 shacks built on stilts above black water that sat so still it looked painted. Tin roofs going orange with rust at the edges, wooden walkways connecting the structures, clothes on lines strung between posts, shirts and work pants and what looked like a child's dress hanging in the dead air. 3 of the chimneys had smoke coming out of them, thin wisps rising straight up in the windless dawn. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Too early for chimney smoke. Too much like someone knew I was coming. I cut the engine and sat for a minute. The frogs had been loud the whole drive down, but out here they'd gone quiet. No birds either, even though the sky was lightning fast and birds in Louisiana are never quiet at dawn. The silence was the kind you notice the way you notice when a familiar sound stops. A clock stopping, a refrigerator switching off. Your body registers it before your brain catches up. I got out anyway. The air hit me like standing in front of an open dishwasher, hot and damp and carrying something underneath the normal swamp smell. Something older and darker, like water that had been sitting somewhere closed for a long time. I pulled my shirt up over my nose for a second, and then felt stupid about it. The walkway to the settlement was solid enough under my boots. Old wood, gray and slick with moss, but it held. I walked out toward the first row of shacks, slow, watching the windows. All the curtains were drawn. All the doors were shut. Whoever had lit those chimneys wasn't showing themselves. On the far side of the clearing, past the last row of shacks, there was a cemetery. 20-some wooden crosses, all of them listing a little to one side the way things list in soft ground. Each cross had a name carved into the crossbeam, rough, like someone had done it with a pocket knife. The date was the same on every single one. August 29th, 2005. I only checked the first 3 before I stopped needing to. The largest cross stood at the center. Someone had spray-painted the wood in red letters, the paint old and faded but still readable. The water took us, but we didn't leave. I stood there looking at it for a while. It looked like grief. Like something built not to live in, but to keep living in. Like leaving was the one thing they couldn't bring themselves to do even after everything. I should have gotten back in my truck then. I know that now. Instead, I kept walking. The shacks were small inside from what I could see through the curtains. Iron cots, oil lamps, shelves with canned goods and folded clothes. One had children's drawings tacked to the wall, crayon houses and stick figures and blue wavy lines that I took for water. All of it was damp. Everything in this place was damp in the way things get when they've never fully dried out. A deep wetness that had gone into the wood and the fabric and the air itself. On the main walkway, near the first chimney, I found the Wendy's bag. It was one of ours, the red and white striped paper, the same bags I'd been setting by the back door every Monday and Thursday for a month. This one had been torn open and picked clean. But inside, caught against the grease-stained bottom, was a napkin with writing on it. The ink had run, but it was still readable. "Thank you for feeding us. Tomorrow we need 4 bags." More of us came home. I read it twice. Then I folded it and put it in my pocket. 4 bags. More of us came home. That phrase sat in my chest in a way I didn't like. I was still looking at the bag when the smell hit me. Salt water. Sharp and sudden, like standing on a beach in a storm. Not the mild, brackish smell that sat over everything in this parish, but something concentrated and forceful, like the ocean had moved inland overnight. Rule 6 was in my head before my body was moving. If you smell salt water, leave the building immediately. I wasn't in a building, but I didn't think Mr. Trusclair would quibble about that. I walked fast back down the walkway, kept myself from running. Got to my truck, got in, got the engine running. I backed out down the gravel road, watching the settlement shrink in my headlights until the cypress trees closed it off. Then I turned around on the main road and drove. When I was about a quarter mile out, I looked in the rear view. 7 figures stood at the edge of the clearing where the road met the trees. Long coats, wide-brimmed hats, very still. I couldn't make out faces at that distance in the morning gray. One of them raised a hand and held it up with fingers spread. 7 fingers. A count, not a wave. I kept driving. I slept 5 hours when I got home. Then I drove to the Terrebonne Parish Library in Houma and asked the librarian, a small white-haired woman named Mrs. Gautreau, for the microfilm archives from 2005 and 2006. She set me up at the reader and brought me a cup of water I hadn't asked for. But when I came back to the desk an hour later and asked specifically about the Tibito and Vere families' swamp settlement south of Bourg, she went quiet in a way that was different from just thinking. "You're not from here," she said. I told her Lafayette moved back to Terrebonne Parish a few months ago. "Then don't go looking for things that have been left alone." She said it the way older people in this part of Louisiana state facts. Plain and without decoration, like the fact didn't need it. "You stay away from that swamp, young man." I thanked her and went back to the microfilm. The articles were from the Houma Courier, September and October 2005. About 30 people, the paper called them the Tibito Vere community, had disappeared from a swamp settlement south of Bourg after the storm. They were described as deeply distrustful of outsiders and had declined evacuation. Search and rescue found the settlement flooded and empty. No bodies. A 2006 follow-up said the families were presumed dead, no surviving relatives known. No bodies recovered. I typed that into my phone notes. 30 people. No bodies. I drove home with the radio on loud the whole way. My phone buzzed at 2:30 a.m., 3 nights after the settlement visit. Unknown number. No area code I recognized. "We are grateful for the food. We don't mean to scare you." I was mopping the dining room. I stood there with the handle in both hands and read the message 3 times. Then I typed back, "Who are you?" The answer came fast. "We used to live here before the water. We are trying to come back." I thought about the cemetery. August 29th, 2005. Same date on every cross. "Are you ghosts?" I typed. A longer pause. Long enough that I pocketed the phone and went back to mopping. Then, "We don't know anymore." I read that 3 times. I didn't reply. I put the phone face down on a table and finished the dining room with the overheads off, telling myself it was to save power. The fryer turned on at 2:47 a.m. exactly. I stayed in the dining room. At 2:52, it shut itself off, right on schedule. I left the phone face down until the shift ended. The footprints came back 6 nights after that. I pushed through the kitchen door, and the flashlight caught them, wet, barefoot prints on the tile, running from the back door toward the walk-in freezer. Multiple sets this time, at least 3 different sizes. The smallest ones were very small, the size of a young child's foot, the heel marks pooling slightly with water that hadn't fully dried. I had the red mop bucket mixed with salt. I'd started doing that automatically. I stood looking at the prints. Rule 3 said don't follow them. I had followed the rule before. I should have followed it again, but the smallest prints were what got me. A kid's feet on a cold tile floor at 3 in the morning. It pulled at something I couldn't switch off. I followed them to the freezer door and pushed through. The door swung shut behind me. The latch caught. I wasn't worried. Walk-ins have emergency releases. A T-bar handle on the inside wall. Red, you can't miss it. I turned and found it and pulled. It didn't move. Not stuck exactly. More like it had been cold for so long that cold had become its permanent state. I pulled harder. Nothing. My breath was already clouding out in front of me. "Okay," I said out loud to the empty freezer. That had become a habit. Then I turned around. 3 figures stood in the far corner. They hadn't been there when I walked in. I'd had the flashlight on the whole time. The freezer was 30 feet across, nowhere to hide. But there they were. A tall man, a woman in a work coat, a child pressed against the woman's side. Standing close together the way people stand when they're cold, which in a walk-in freezer has a different edge to it. Up close, the white patches were worse than I'd seen them on the security monitor. Not pale skin, something else. Raised and crystalline, like coral, like frost that had grown into a pattern. On the man's neck and jaw, covering the woman's hands almost entirely. On the child's cheek, spreading toward the ear. They caught the flashlight beam the wrong way, like they were lit from underneath. None of them moved. Then the woman said, "We're sorry. We don't want to scare you." Her voice was hoarse, the way a voice gets after too much water in the throat, but calm, almost gentle. "There are more of us coming," she said. 13 now. Some of them are sick. They need medicine more than food." She looked at me steady. "You've been kind to us. We don't forget kindness." The emergency release clicked on its own. I hadn't touched it. It just clicked and swung open. When I turned back, the 3 figures were gone the way fog goes. Not vanishing exactly, just becoming less there, 1 degree at a time, until there was nothing in the corner but cold air and frost on the shelving. I stood in the open doorway a moment. Then I looked at the floor near where they'd been. There was something wedged between the bottom shelf and the wall, half covered in frost. A small jacket, dark blue, child-sized. I pulled it out. It was stiff with salt and soaking wet, the kind of wet that doesn't dry because it isn't from rain. The collar had a name tag sewn into it, the careful kind a parent sews in for school. Noah Verrett. I carried it to the kitchen and set it on the prep counter and stood looking at it under the fluorescent light. Then I turned around. All 13 of them were standing inside the open freezer, watching me through the doorway. Different heights, different ages, pressed together in that cold space. Long coats on some of them, bare feet on most. White patches on every face and neck and pair of hands I could see. Their eyes didn't catch the kitchen light right. Too flat, too still. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody blinked. Then they faded. Slow, like the first 3. Less there. Gone. I was left in the kitchen with the freezer door swinging open and a wet, salt-stiff jacket and the frogs going in the dark outside. I looked at the clock. 5:04 a.m. I picked up my phone and called Mr. Trosclair. He answered on the 3rd ring, voice rough. "I need to know what they really are," I said. "Not what they told you. Not what you decided was safe to tell me. What they actually are." A pause. The frogs outside went quiet. "Come back tonight," he said. "I'll bring someone who knew them. Before the water." He hung up. I locked the restaurant and drove home and sat on my front steps in the morning heat for a long time before I could make myself go inside. Mr. Trosclair arrived at midnight. I was mopping the dining room when I heard the knock at the front door. 3 knocks, which was different from 5, which mattered now. I looked through the glass and saw his truck in the lot, and next to him a woman I didn't recognize. Short, gray hair and a braid. She was carrying a medical bag and looking at the building the way a doctor looks at a patient she already knows bad news about. I let them in. Mr. Trosclair looked worse than the last time I'd seen him, which hadn't been good. His hands were shaking even without a coffee cup to blame it on. He introduced the woman as Marguerite Hebert. Nurse practitioner, he said, worked with isolated communities down in the parish. She had rough hands and the kind of calm that comes from seeing bad things long enough that the surprise wears off. "Tell her what you told me," Mr. Trosclair said. He sat down in the nearest booth and didn't get back up for the rest of the conversation. I told her. All of it. The settlement, the cemetery with the same date on every cross, the Wendy's bag with the note, the freezer, the 13 figures, Noah Verrett's jacket. I put my phone on the table and showed her the photos I'd taken the morning I'd driven out there, the ones I'd taken fast before the salt smell hit. Marguerite looked at each photo slowly. She didn't ask me to scroll faster. When she got to the one of Jules and Therese on the walkway, I'd managed to get it through the truck window before I realized what I was seeing. She went very still. "Jules Tibito," she said. Not a question. That's what the text messages said. "And Therese." She kept looking at the photo. "I treated Therese for a broken wrist in 2003. She stopped. "These people are dead, Ethan. I attended the memorial. I knew the families." "I know," I said. "The library had articles. No bodies recovered." She put my phone down. She looked at Mr. Trosclair. Something passed between them. The kind of look between people who've been keeping the same secret from different ends. "How long?" she asked him. Mr. Trosclair's hands were still on the table. 20 years, he said. "Jules came back first. 6 months after Katrina. Knocked on the back door one night, dripping wet, asked for food. He said it flat, like he'd been over it in his head so many times the weight had gone out of the words. He looked wrong, sick. The skin was that color, and there were those patches already. But he was talking, using Jules's voice, Jules's stories. He knew things only Jules would know." He paused. "My wife's family came from that settlement. I couldn't..." He stopped again. "I thought he was alive. I kept thinking that for a long time." Marguerite was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Those people you saw, I knew them, and they should not be walking." She put her medical bag on the table and asked me if I could get her into the settlement at dawn. We drove out there at first light, the three of us in Marguerite's truck. Mr. Trosclair sat in the back and didn't say anything the whole ride. The cypress trees did their thing with the headlights and then opened up into the clearing, and the settlement was there the same as before. Smoke from chimneys, clothes on the lines, 12 shacks on stilts over black water that looked like it hadn't moved in 20 years. 2 figures were waiting on the main walkway. The tall one moved with that forward lean I'd seen before, like something in the spine had gone wrong. He was gaunt, gray-skinned, and his eyes found us before we'd even gotten out of the truck. The woman beside him was shorter, older, and she kept her hands folded in front of her in a way that covered most of the white patches I could see creeping up from her wrists. Jules Tibito and Therese beside him. Margaret got out of the truck first. She walked toward them, and I watched her face as she got close enough to see them clearly. She didn't show much. She had that nurse's control, but something shifted around her eyes, and she stopped moving for just a second. "Jules?" she said. "Marguerite." Jules's voice was hoarse and wet, like he'd been underwater and hadn't quite drained. "It's good to see you came. We've needed someone who knows medicine for a long time." "Your teeth," Marguerite said quietly, almost to herself. I hadn't noticed it until she said it. Jules's teeth were very white. Not just healthy white. The kind of white that has no history in it, no coffee stains, no wear, nothing that 20 years without a dentist would do. Same with Therese. The same with the others who started drifting out of doorways as we walked the settlement. They were all too perfect in ways that were hard to name individually. It was only when you looked at all of them together that the wrongness added up. Marguerite went through the settlement methodically, asking questions, taking notes, shining a pen light in eyes that tracked the beam the way a predator tracks movement, not following it out of reflex, but watching it, deciding whether it was worth the effort. She examined hands and faces and arms. She asked about the white patches. Jules said they had been there since the water, said the whole community had developed them, said he thought they were something the bayou had given them. Near the last shack, A woman named Evangeline sat on a crate outside her door. She was older, maybe 70, and the white patches on her face were the worst I'd seen, spreading from her temple down across her cheekbone, crystalline and raised, almost covering her left eye. Marguerite crouched in front of her and asked if she could look. Evangeline nodded. Marguerite touched the edge of the largest patch with 2 fingers, pressing gently, the way a doctor presses to feel what's underneath. Then she pulled her hand back fast. Not panicked, more like controlled, the way you pull your hand back from a hot surface when you're trying not to spill something. She stood up and turned slightly away, and I saw her look at her own palm. Her right hand, the 2 fingers she'd used. She looked at them for a long moment without saying anything. "We should head back," she said. Her voice didn't change. Mr. Trosclair was already walking back toward the truck. Marguerite put her hand in her coat pocket and kept it there the whole drive back. She got a portable microscope out of her medical bag when we were back at the Wendy's and set it up on the prep counter in the kitchen. She took a sample from her own palm without explaining what she was doing, and I stood by the fryer and watched her work. "What did you feel?" I asked. "When you touched Evangeline?" "Something moved," she said. She had her eye to the microscope. "Under the skin, not a muscle reflex, something that was already in motion like..." She stopped. She was quiet for a while. I waited. "This isn't fungal," she said finally. "I thought it was chromoblastomycosis. I was already running through treatment protocols in the truck." She adjusted the focus. "But it's not. It's crystalline. Look." She stepped back, and I looked through the eyepiece. I don't know what I expected. Cells and fibers, the kind of thing you see in a high school biology textbook. What I saw looked like coral or ice. A lattice structure, regular and geometric, with a slow pulse running through it. Not muscle, not tissue, something that had its own rhythm. "It has a heartbeat," I said. "It has a pulse," she corrected me. "Whether it has a heart is a different question." She took her eye back to the scope. "This isn't an infection, it's colonization. Something is growing inside them. Something that's replacing tissue, building itself into the structure of whatever it touches." She pulled back and looked at her hand. "And now it's in me." She said that last part the same way she'd said everything else. Flat and clinical, like she was reporting someone else's chart. Mr. Trosclair, sitting in the dining room booth with a coffee he wasn't drinking, said, "What do we do?" Marguerite packed her microscope back into the bag. "I send samples to a lab I trust, and I look for something that kills it without killing the patient." She closed the bag. "I'll be back." She walked out. I heard her truck start. Mr. Trosclair and I sat in the dining room until he left around 9 a.m. Neither of us said much. He took his coffee with him when he went, still mostly full. I went back to work the following night. I'd thought about calling in sick. Seriously considered it, sitting in my truck in the parking lot at 10:50 with the engine running. Then I thought about rent and loan payments, and the fact that this was still the only job that had hired me in 3 months, and I went in. And the first 3 hours were quiet. No footprints. Camera monitor, empty. Back door, solid. The fryer sat cold and still in the kitchen, the way it should. At 2:47 a.m., it turned on. I was in the dining room, same as always. I heard the click and then the hiss of oil heating up, and I sat in the corner booth with the rule sheet in front of me and read Rule 2 for about the 4th time. Do not go investigate. Do not turn it off. Curiosity is how they got the first one. I put the sheet down. I told myself I was just going to stand in the doorway, not go all the way in. Just look from the door, see nothing, come back. That was the deal I made with myself. I walked to the kitchen doorway and pushed it open. The fryer was on, all 4 baskets up, the oil bright and rolling at full heat, which was wrong because nobody had poured oil into the 2nd and 3rd baskets in weeks. The room smelled like hot grease, and underneath that the salt water smell, faint but there. the way it gets when something is close. Something was standing in the oil. It was waist deep in the nearest basket, and the oil wasn't burning it. It was just standing there the way you stand in a wading pool, and its skin was the gray clay color, and it was wearing Jules's face, exactly Jules's face, except the eyes were wrong. The eyes were completely black, not dark brown, not the cloudy gray of the settlement figures, but a deep matte black, like looking into holes in the ground. No reflection at all. It looked up at me. "We've been patient," it said. Jules's voice, but the water was thicker in it now than it had been at the settlement. It didn't sound like a man who'd swallowed water once. It sounded like a man who was made of it. "We've been patient for a long time, Ethan, but we're hungry for more than food now." I backed out of the doorway and let the door swing shut. I went back to the dining room and sat in the corner booth and did not move. At 2:52 a.m., the fryer clicked off, right on schedule. A minute after that, I looked at the security monitor. All 13 figures were sitting in the booths, every booth in the dining room facing the camera in the same direction. Long coats, hats, gray hands on the tables. The child was in the booth closest to the camera. She raised one hand and waved, small fingers, too slow. I looked away. Rule 4 said not to look longer than necessary. My phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number, same one as before. "You have the patches now, Ethan. We saw them when you reached toward the fryer. You're coming home soon." I looked at my right wrist. I'd pushed my sleeve up to my elbow when I reached for the kitchen door frame, and my wrist had been exposed for maybe 30 seconds at the edge of that hot oil smell. 3 small white patches, below my watch band. I hadn't had them this morning. I would have noticed. I checked the monitor again. The booths were empty. I went to the supply closet and got the bleach we used for the bathrooms and pressed a soaked rag against my wrist. The skin went red, then raw. I scrubbed until it hurt and then looked at my wrist under the fluorescent light in the storage room. The patches were still there, faint, luminescent in a way that bleach shouldn't leave anything, and pulsing, slow and patient, the same rhythm I'd seen under Marguerite's microscope, the same rhythm that had nothing to do with me. I put my sleeve down. I threw the rag in the trash. I went back to the dining room and watched the back door until 5 in the morning. Then I drove home and sat on my front steps and watched the sun come up over the rooftops and tried to figure out what I was going to do next. I didn't come up with anything good. 3 weeks passed and the patches moved. Not fast, slow, the way a stain spreads through cloth when you don't catch it in time. They went from 3 small spots on my right wrist to a smear along the inside of my forearm, pale and crystalline, about 3 inches of it by the end of the 2nd week. By the 3rd week, it had crept toward the midpoint of my forearm, and it pulsed, slow, steady, like a second heartbeat running on a schedule that wasn't mine. I started wearing long sleeves to work. Louisiana in July. The other changes. Deliveries were every night now, not just Monday and Thursday. I made the order, pushed it out without looking, went back to mopping. Mr. Trosclair had stopped calling to check in. He left extra cash in the register drawer without explanation. Marguerite had stopped coming inside. She'd park on the gravel shoulder before my shift and stay there. Headlights off, just her silhouette behind the wheel, staring at the tree line where the gravel road started. Some nights I brought coffee to her window. When she took it, the parking lot light caught her right hand wrong. The palm, where the patch had started after she touched Evangeline, had gone almost completely white. Smooth and even, something that looked like skin, but moved like it had different priorities. She was still researching. She hadn't found anything. The dreams started around the end of the 1st week. I'd fall asleep and be in an attic. Low ceiling, water-stained plywood, heat, and outside the window, nothing but flat black water to the horizon. I'd crouch near the glass and watch the flood rise through the floor slats, cold and salt-smelling and sweet underneath in that specific swamp way. Below me, 5 knocks. Pause. 5 more. Let us in. We just want to come home." I always called back, even knowing I shouldn't. The water kept rising. I started setting an alarm to wake at 4 hours because 4 hours in, the water was still at chest level and I could still breathe. 9 days before the confrontation, I saw Noah at school. Supply run to the Walmart in Homa, coming back past Bayou Vista Elementary during morning drop-off. I stopped at the sign while kids crossed in front of my truck, and one of them turned and looked at me. Small boy. Dark eyes, brown hair needing a cut, blue backpack with a cartoon dinosaur. He'd been laughing at something. The laugh stopped when he saw me, and his head tilted slightly. Noah Vere. Same face as in the freezer. He smiled. The corners of his mouth went too far. I looked at his shadow on the pavement. Low morning sun, everything casting long. His shadow matched his body except for the head. The shadow head had something growing from the top of it. 2 curved shapes, branching. Antlers. Clear in the shadow, nothing on his actual head. Shadow. Antlers. Head. Just a kid. I looked back and forth twice. Noah raised one hand and waved. From the truck, I could see his teeth. Narrow. Pointed. Like the jaw of a catfish. I drove without waiting for the crossing guard. Sat in the Wendy's parking lot for 20 minutes with the engine running before I could make myself go inside. Patricia Landry called that afternoon. She was the legal aid lawyer helping with my student loans. The original problem, back when that felt like the worst thing in my life. She sounded careful on the phone. "I got curious about those family names you mentioned," she said. "The Tibito family. I pulled death records. They're all dead, Ethan. Death certificates and coroner's reports from 2005, drowning everyone August 29th. Bodies were recovered." A pause. "Buried at St. Joseph's Cemetery in Chauvin. I have the plot numbers if you need them." I wrote them on a receipt. I drove to Chauvin before my shift. St. Joseph's was a small cemetery off a 2-lane road, live oaks dragging Spanish moss over the gate. I found the section near the back fence and walked the row. The headstones had photographs in glass ovals at the top. Jules Tibito, August 29th, 2005. Therese Tibito, August 29th, 2005. Marie Tibito, August 29th, 2005. Age 8. Noah Vere, August 29th, 2005. Age 6. His photo showed a boy with brown hair that needed a cut and a gap between his front teeth I'd seen that morning from inside my truck. Same gap, same face, dead 20 years. Buried here, in ground I could put my hand on. I knew every name on every stone, from the freezer, from the settlement, from the text messages I hadn't deleted. The thing wearing their faces had been doing it for 20 years and gotten so good at it that Marguerite, who had treated Therese for a broken wrist and attended their memorial, had stood on that walkway and believed what she was seeing. I drove back with the radio on. I couldn't hear what was playing. I didn't go in for my shift. I called Mr. Trosclair, and he answered, first ring. Before I could say anything, he said, "Don't do something stupid, Ethan." Flat and quiet, like he'd been expecting this call since the day he handed me the laminated rules. I hung up. I drove south. The gravel road was exactly where it always was. I turned in just before midnight, and the cypress trees closed overhead, and the dark got that quality it always had out here. Heavier, wetter, like the air was paying attention. The settlement looked the same. It always looked the same. I got out and started shouting. "I know your names, all 32. I stood at your headstones tonight. I put my hand on the stone. You are not those people." 4 seconds of silence. Then the doors opened. Jules and Therese first, then others from the shack doors, then more rising from the water beneath the walkways, more from the tree line. I stopped counting at 30. Jules's face had gotten worse. The skin hung loose at his jaw now, the edges beginning to separate, like a mask worn too many times. The white patches covered all of them completely. He walked toward me and stopped 6 feet away. His eyes were the pure, matte black I'd seen in the fryer oil. "You found our graves," he said, Jules's voice thick with water all through it. "Then you know. We died in that water, waiting for help that came 4 days late. The water kept us and changed us." His black eyes moved to my right forearm. "The way it's changing you." My sleeve had ridden up. The patches on my arm were pulsing harder than they had since the fryer night, fast and excited, like something that recognized where it was. Jules extended one gray, crystalline hand, palm up. "Join us. The hunger goes quiet after the first year. Just becomes background, like traffic, like frogs, anything you get used to. You'll have everyone here, every name on every stone." The loose skin at his jaw shifted. "You've been dreaming our attic for 3 weeks. The water is already most of the way home." I thought about Marguerite in her car, with her white hand in her pocket. I thought about Noah's antler shadow. I thought about Mr. Trosclair, who had sent me into this job with a laminated card and 20 years of knowledge he hadn't shared. I reached into my pocket and got my pocket knife. Jules watched me open it. Nothing changed in his expression. "I'd rather bleed out in this swamp," I said, "than let you finish what you started on my arm." I pressed the blade to my right wrist, above the highest patch, and pushed until the skin opened. The blood that ran out was black. Not dark red. Black, like bayou water at midnight, dripping off my palm into the mud. Jules laughed, that wet gurgle underneath. "It's in your blood already, in your lungs, in the dreams you've been having. You can't cut it out." He stepped forward. The circle tightened from every direction, the salt smell filling my lungs. My patches hammered. The sky went pale. One thin line at the eastern horizon, then gray-pink spreading up through the canopy. Then one ray of sun cut across the black water between the shacks. The sound that went through the settlement hit me in my chest, high and wet and furious from 30-some throats at once. Jules stepped back twice, hard. The others broke for the shacks and the water, moving fast, that forward lean nearly horizontal as they rushed. Jules held his ground one moment longer, eyes on mine. "The sun goes down again tonight," he said. "It always does." He stepped off the walkway edge. The water barely moved. I stood there with black blood slowing at my wrist, the cut already sealing with thin white crystal at the edges, and the settlement was empty and still. Clothes on lines, smoke from a chimney. Same as always. Patient. Waiting. I walked back to my truck. I drove until I hit the highway. I drove until gas stations and traffic and the smell of normal things were close enough to hold. I stopped shaking somewhere outside of Gonzales. I don't work at the Wendy's anymore. I moved to Baton Rouge, took what fit in the truck, and left everything else. Day shift at a hardware store, sawdust, machine oil, nothing alive. Long sleeves in August. People ask, and I say skin condition. The patches haven't spread since that morning. 3 on my right wrist, the smear up the forearm, and a new one last month on the inside of my elbow. Pale, about the size of a quarter, that slow pulse. Marguerite says the rate has slowed. She doesn't say stopped. She meets me at a diner on Airline Highway every few weeks. Fluorescent lights, bad coffee. We sit in the same booth and compare patches the way 2 people share a diagnosis no one else knows exists. Both her hands now, creeping toward the wrists, and one at the corner of her left eye she covers with her hair. Still looking for treatment. Nothing yet. We don't talk about what happens when they reach our hearts. Some nights, I drive south without planning to, end up on the narrow roads in Terrebonne Parish, and when I get close enough, the patches on my forearm warm up, pulse quickening, recognizing something nearby. The mailbox is still there at the gravel road turnoff. New orange reflector. The road hasn't been paved. If I crack my window, I can hear them. Not my name, not knocking, just breathing. Slow, wet, patient, like the swamp asleep and dreaming of the next flood season. I've driven past 4 times. I keep going, every time. I check the rear view out of habit, and so far there's nothing in the road behind me, so far. If you're ever on Highway 56 after midnight and you see a gravel road on the left with an orange reflector on the mailbox, keep driving. Don't slow down. Don't crack your window. And once you're past it, do not look in your rear view mirror. Because if you see someone standing in the road behind you, gray skin, long coat, wide-brimmed hat, one hand raised, count the fingers. That number is how many days you have. And know they weren't just standing there tonight. They've been following you for much longer than you think. The water is always rising. The hunger is always watching. And somewhere on my right forearm, right now, something that is not my heartbeat is keeping time.